Good morning, Commander Burbank. This is Tariq Malik with Space.com. How do you hear me today? Good morning, Commander Burbank. This is Tariq Malik with Space.com.
Tariq, good morning. Got you loud and clear.
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much for having some time to talk with us today, and welcome back to Houston. Obviously, I guess our first question is how has it been coming back home after landing and readapting to all the minor details of life on Earth with gravity.
Gravity is probably the most challenging thing, I think. Compared to a shuttle mission, though, in some ways, it was probably a little bit easier, and it's because I think now for the long-duration missions, with the exercise equipment you got on board, you can, in the time that we devote to it every day, you can actually finish out a mission and feel like you're fairly fit. It does take a little bit of time to get your gyros working properly again, but after 2 weeks, I feel pretty much back to normal.
That's good to hear. Has there been any unexpected side effects of getting back to Earth? Have you? I think some folks have told us how maybe they put a glass up in the air thinking it's going to float, and they forget that there is gravity. Anything like that?
So far, none. Maybe because I'm a little bit careful about it. Actually, after a shuttle mission, though, occasionally that would be the case. You'd be shaving in the morning and put out a can of shaving cream in front of you and expect it to float there. And I haven't had anything like that this time. But no, I feel very, very normal. Look forward very much to running every day, getting out and actually running and watching the world go by instead of running on a treadmills. It's really, really pleasant, very nice.
Well, now that you're back, what was the one thing, if there is one thing, that you can say that you missed that was maybe like a small comfort of life on Earth, something that's obviously your family and friends. But just one of those little things that you really just, when you got back, you're like, oh, I really missed this.
Yeah, I think hands down family, the time that you spend away on station, actually the time that you spend away from family during the couple of years of training leading up to your launch, that's pretty tough. That's one of the toughest aspects, I think, of long-duration spaceflight right now. But to get back and be with family again, far and away, is the thing that's most precious. You missed most. There's a lot of things, the kinds of food that you might eat here. We've got a great selection on board, but it still isn't quite the same as having fresh vegetables and so there's a lot of that you certainly enjoy. But there's an awful lot that we're able to do on space station right now. It's big and as well designed for long duration, crew living. The space station's actually quite a nice place.
What was that first maybe Earth meal that you requested when you got home, either in Kazakhstan or in Houston?
A meat lover's pizza. That was number one. Actually, before that, there actually was a T-bone steak too that we managed to track down on our flight back to Houston through Scotland, Prestwick.
Oh, that sounds tasty for sure. You mentioned the space station, and now that you've flown on both, the short duration and long duration, I'm wondering what was your favorite aspect of both flying to the station and then also serving as its commander there, now that you've had some time to kind of reflect on it?
I think for everybody that does a short duration mission, everybody that's been to space station, maybe had a hand in some of the assembly work on space station, I think for all of us, you always wonder what it would be like to spend enough time up there to really adapt to space, to really become, a creature of space in a way, to become very good at living up there. And the views of planet Earth are unbelievable through the cupola, and those are something that'll always mean a lot to you. But I think just living and working up there, getting very good at it, doing the science you do on space station, making it become a home for you that you really feel as much at home in, as capable as you would in any environment you've ever been on planet Earth. To go through that transition, which does take some time, that's probably one of the really neatest, most rewarding aspects. And it requires being up there, certainly a lot longer than 2 weeks.
Great, thanks. One thing we did, because we knew that we were going to be speaking with you today, is we asked our Space.com readers if there are any questions they would ask you, if they could, and they sent us some really interesting ones. And if it's all right, I hope to ask them to you, at least a few of them.
Absolutely.
Well, to start off, John, thank you by the way. John Rukowitz, he mentioned that he's heard about the high-speed particles that astronauts sometimes see, those flashes of light. I think I've seen Don Pettit write about them as well. And he was wondering if you experienced any of that, and if so, how often it might happen, if it's a nuisance or anything.
There's some different words for it. It's Cherenkov radiation. It's we call them phosphenes, and what it really is radiation that could be galactic cosmic rays. It could be particles from the solar wind, and these interact with basically the fluid inside the eye. And it's the same kind of phenomenon that you might see if you've ever seen photos or video of the cooling water in reactors, nuclear reactors, for example. It's the bluish glow that you would see there. And essentially, these radiation particles will interact with the fluid in the eye, and you don't see it as blue. You'll see it as glowing flashes. It'd be similar to me, what it looks like is if you're flying in an airplane at high altitude and you see a thunderstorm in the distance, and if there's a lightning bolt inside the thunderstorm, kind of that sort of that glowing, diffuse flash that you'll see. So it's not something your eyes can focus on. It's not something that you see as a point source, and it's not something you see certainly as a ray, but you see it as kind of a glowing flash. You'll notice it when the space station or the space shuttle go through what we call the South Atlantic Anomaly. It's a slight depression in the magnetosphere of Earth, where a lot of these charged particles actually will, during their trajectory from the North and South Pole, will actually impinge a little bit onto the orbit of the space station. So if you're dark adapted, if you're getting ready to go to sleep, for example, and your eyes have become more sensitive and you're in a dark environment, you'll notice them more, and you'll just see a few of them. And it's kind of contingent upon how energetic the sun may be, what the radiation flux is, and it's a very interesting effect. And it's not all that frequent, though.
Oh. Great. Well, thanks for that. I think that's the first time I've heard it described as blue. So that's pretty neat. Christopher Nguyen, he was wondering what your ambitions or what you see as the key ambition that you would like human spaceflight or spaceflight in general to reach for or achieve in like the next 30 years.
Right. I think I think this is something extremely valuable to us as human beings, to us as Americans. I think spaceflight is really our destination. It's where human beings need to go next. And I think when I was growing up as a kid, I thought that by this time we would have thousands and thousands of people living in space, living on the moon, living on Mars, etc. Well, it turns out spaceflight's a pretty tough thing. So it's not the kind of thing that maybe things didn't progress quite as quickly as I'd like, but we're now to a point where commercial companies now can take over the piece of getting from the surface of planet Earth to low Earth orbit, and can essentially set the stage for NASA to take the next big step. And I think we'll do that in an international way. I think in the next coming decades we will see people living on the moon, on Mars, and we'll visit asteroids, and I think that is really our destination. I think all the things that you get out of spaceflight, the technology that you get from that, but in a more ethereal way, I think the benefits to humankind are in expanding our horizons, and that's what I'd like to see us do in the coming decades.
We had a related question from Nathan Wise, and he wanted to know specifically about the privatization of space. We know that SpaceX is going to launch later this month with the first Dragon capsule. The orbital capsule is going to launch later in the year, and we just saw the new SpaceX manned capsule as well. I'm worried as a NASA astronaut, not worried, interested as a NASA astronaut. What your thoughts are to ride on a private capsule, and what it means to have more than one group with a spacecraft for the United States.
I probably speak for a lot of us that have been doing this business for a while, and I think riding on any space vehicle would be great. You want to make sure they're safe. You want to make sure that the vehicles have all the redundancy they need to have so that you can safely get to and from space, not just for ourselves, but what that means for the future of space travel. I think the more means, the more ways that we have to get to space, the better. We don't want to have only a single way to do it. And I think for us, in our own personal interests as Americans, I think it's good for us to have American-built vehicles as well. But again, I believe this is the kind of thing that we do as a human species. So I am happy to see us have more and more capability to get to low Earth orbit. I think it's probably the job of countries and job of space agencies to invest in the hardest thing. And right now I think the hardest thing is leaving low Earth orbit and going into deep space. So the Space Launch System, which will give us heavy lift capability to get lots of hardware up into low Earth orbit that we can then take to the Moon and Mars and in asteroids, I think that is really the purview of NASA. And having a deep space spacecraft like Orion, the multipurpose crew vehicle, is the thing to do there. But we've gotten to the point in space exploration, I think, where commercial companies can take over that piece, again, from low Earth orbit or from the surface of the Earth to low Earth orbit, and NASA and other space agencies can contract that out. And it will also give those commercial entities the capability of selling those services to other folks, maybe not space agencies per se. And the more people we have in space, the better it is, I think, for all of us.
Well, Commander Burbank, thank you so much. I could ask you questions all day, but I know that my time, unfortunately, is up. Welcome back again. All the best, and we look forward to your next spaceflight.
Tarek, thanks very much. It was good talking with you today.
Thank you.
For the surfers, and then more of a choppy effect to the waters as we head toward the weekend time frame. That'll start like tonight through our Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, probably blowing northeast at 15 to 20 knots. The seas coming up
Good morning, Dan. This is Orlando. Can you hear me?
I've got you loud and clear.
80s
Good
across
morning.
the coastal areas today. Same for the interior.
Thank you so much for talking with us. You're going to be talking with John coming up in just about a minute.
County 66.
Okay, very good.
And
Thanks.
60s dot the coast all the way into the treasure.
Thank you so very much.
Flapping in the breeze Friday and Saturday and possibly for Sunday. Overnight lows around 70 and the weekend temp Saturday looking good, around 85.
Well, the roads are still calm out there for the most part, Jamie, which is something we like to see. We don't typically get days like today. We're completely accident-free along the I-4 corridor, also 408 looking great. And as a result, you can see all of your drive times are still unaffected this morning. Let's take you down to a DOT camera to show you a few images of this. You can see I-4 at Conroy, the eastbound side, of course, getting just a little bit busier as they head towards the downtown skyline, which you can see way off there in the distance. But the westbound side moving just fine at this early hour. We have one other camera to show you in Maitland. Many of you, of course, are headed down from Seminole County to the downtown region. You can see cars here are flying by at 7:15. Now let's send it back to John and Amy.
All right, we're saving you some money with the fire.
Stand by, Dan.
Today it's $3.49 a gallon at the Hess Station on Vineland Road and Polynesian Isle Boulevard in Kissimmee. And it's also below $3.50, $3.49 a gallon at the Shell Station on State Road 535 and Vistana Drive in Orlando. New jobs could be headed to the Space Coast soon to help fill the void left by the retired Space Shuttle program. A company called ATK is unveiling a new rocket and spacecraft system, and they unveiled it yesterday. If NASA decides to use it, it could mean 150 to 200 new jobs along the Space Coast. ATK says test launches should start in 2014. The system could be ready to send astronauts to the ISS by 2016. And speaking of the future of spaceflight, our astronauts are still in a sort of limbo right now, trying to figure out how they're going to be getting to and from the ISS for future missions. And joining us live on Good Day is astronaut Dan Burbank. He's got some local ties. I believe, Dan, you got your master's degree over at Embry-Riddle, right? You spent a lot of time here in Central Florida?
That's right. Actually, John, I took those courses while I was at NASA Langley at the Embry-Riddle campus that was up there. But yes, I have been to the campus as well down in Florida.
All right, you spend a lot of time up on the ISS, and a lot of people wonder what really happens up there. What exactly were you working on?
An awful lot, for one thing. We've got nearly a million pounds worth of space station up there, and it's manned and operated by 6 folks typically. And although right now we're in a short couple of week period where we have just 3 crew members on board, and lots of science is going on board. During the 6 months we were there, we did about 200 different scientific investigations. A lot of the things you do on space station is keeping the space station operating, and probably one of the harshest environments known to humans. But a lot of it is the science right now. That is the main thrust. That's what space station was built for.
Dan, I had 2 separate people ask me yesterday when they found out I was going to be talking to you. They said, what do they do in their downtime? Do you guys work around the clock, or when you're off the clock, what exactly can you do on the ISS?
Well, our workday typically goes from about 6 in the morning when you get up till about 7, maybe 8 or 9 at the latest, typically in the evenings. And you have of course, the typical breaks you'd have for meals and also for exercise time. But the time that you have off, which includes a day and a half on the weekends and the after-hours time, a lot of it is spent looking out the windows, taking imagery of planet Earth, taking imagery of different celestial objects, auroras, for example. We have the capability of watching news, watching movies on occasion if we have the time. But just living in space, I think, is living and experiencing what it's like to be up there and spending time, with the other crew members, enjoying meals together and talking is typically what you do.
An office with a heck of a view.
Yeah.
Now, you actually got back from the ISS thanks to a Russian Soyuz rocket. What are your thoughts on private industries like we're talking about so much here in Central Florida getting into the space race? Do you like that, or does it concern you?
It doesn't concern me. I think the more ways we have to get to space, the better off we all are. And I would like to see us have as many different American-built vehicles as we possibly can. But in general, for humans to access space, we just need to have many of them. And up until now, developing and operating those spacecraft has really been the purview of space agencies and using the tax dollars of the citizens of those countries that support it. And typically that's the kind of thing that NASA has done. Now, truly private industry has developed those vehicles for us in the past. But they have developed those with a lot of involvement directly from the scientists and engineers of NASA, for example. We've gotten to the point, I think, right now where the accessing low Earth orbit is something that commercial companies can do with less direct involvement, less direction by NASA, for example. And I think it's NASA's job to take the next step, and that is to go from low Earth orbit to deep space. So we want to go to the moon, to Mars, and to asteroids. And I think developing the SLS, developing a deep space spacecraft like Orion to get us there, that's what we should be doing. But I'd be happy to fly on some of these commercial developed vehicles that are currently in work.
That seems to be the way it's going. Astronaut Dan Burbank, thanks so much. We hope to talk to you soon.
Okay, thank you. It's good to be with you.
We're ready? Hey, Dan, good morning. It's Peter King at CBS News Radio. How are you this morning?
Peter, I'm doing great. It's great to be with you again.
It's good to talk to you again. And listening to your answers earlier with Tarek, it sounds like your adjustment to Earth has been pretty quick. So I'm wondering just how quickly can you get back to running and jogging and doing those strenuous earthly activities that you've missed?
Yeah, well, it was R+1, return plus 1 day when I was doing a VO2 or oxygen maximal uptake experiment. So they were putting me to work pretty early, but that was on a bicycle. It wasn't any pounding. It wasn't like if you're out running on trails and so forth. So it was probably, I guess, return plus 4 or 5 days when I first got to do a little bit of jogging. But
were your legs wobbly, or did they feel good that first time out?
Actually, not too bad. I remember after shuttle missions, just walking on the beach at Cocoa Beach shortly after landing, doing that for an hour or so, the next couple of days feeling, really, really tired, very sore legs. With ARED, which is the advanced resistive exercise device we got on station, we can do squats and deadlifts and heel raises at really high load. And I think for the most part, we're coming back with about, in as good shape as you could be from a lower body standpoint. So that part's been actually pretty easy.
Over the last year or so, there have been a number of reports about the eyesight of returning astronauts and cosmonauts from the space station, and how sometimes there have been visual changes, visual impairments, sometimes visual impairments up in space. First of all, how's your eyesight at this point, and did you experience any of that while you're up there?
Peter, I was actually pretty lucky. There was no change at all from an eyesight standpoint. And it's been the minority of crew members, astronauts and cosmonauts, that have had that. And I think the scientists are still trying to get their arms around exactly what the phenomena is. But we actually protect for it, and we've got all of our standard glasses that we might have flown beforehand, and we've also got some that'll get us a little bit higher power if we need it on orbit. But I was lucky, I think. You
know how they say there's no crying in baseball. If you wake up in the morning on Earth and you have a bad head cold like I did the last couple of mornings, you could call in sick. But are there sick days in space, or are there no sick days in space?
We didn't need any sick days. I suppose if somebody, certainly if somebody was ill, if somebody had a problem, we could accommodate that. It's interesting because here on planet Earth, or traveling the way we typically do, it's really easy to get a little bit run down and get a cold. Nobody had a cold of any sort. There's no flus or colds. If somebody were to bring something up, if somebody was sick before they launched, I suppose that could happen. But you're up there, you're working pretty hard, working long days, maybe getting a little bit run down, but nobody had any issues from a medical standpoint, which was actually kind of nice.
You visited the station before. Obviously, this is your first long-duration mission there. Did it live up to or exceed your expectations?
It exceeded them many-fold over. When I was there last on 12A STS-115 in September 2006, the space station was probably 2/3 the size of what it is currently, and we didn't have a cupola. So we didn't have this unbelievable window on the world that allows you to see a continent worth beneath you. You can see thousands of miles in all directions, and that place, that window, is in and of itself is probably worth being up there if you needed any reason. So. Yeah.
We have a new crew, or 3 new crew members getting ready to launch in a Soyuz next Monday, and I'm wondering, I'm sure you guys crossed paths for a while after you landed. What have you told them about your experience that's going to help them out?
Yeah, we We get to talk a lot, although not as much as I would have liked. I'd like to give Joe, Gennady, and Sergei one more call before they leave, but they've all been there before. Well, Sergei, actually, this will be his first flight, but Gennady has certainly spent a lot of time on space station, and Joe's been up there on space shuttle missions, and I think they're going to be wonderfully, pleasantly surprised at what it's like to be there. And I think for Joe, being up there for long duration, he's going to love every minute of it. I think everybody that goes there, that's made that transition from the shuttle-style mission to a long-duration mission, is just going to be wowed, is going to be very delighted with what it's like to be up there.
That said, they're going to be very, very busy early on with the expected arrival of the SpaceX Dragon capsule if everything goes as planned. You know, the station crew that's up there right now, the folks you left behind have had a lot of time to prepare, as did you. I think that was originally supposed to be during your personal increment. But, you know, there are some long poles to clear, and if you could talk a little bit about that, you know, the difficulty or the ease of doing this.
Yeah. I wouldn't have much to say about the ease of doing it. I think we get reminded many times how difficult space flight is. But I think it's important for the SpaceX Dragon vehicle, the SpaceX demo mission, this first one, for us to make sure that the vehicle is in the best configuration it can be. This is a critical capability. The logistics life stream that all these vehicles provide space station is critical. If we want to keep a crew up there long term and do the science space station was meant for, we have to make sure we have vehicles like the SpaceX Dragon, like the Orbital Sciences Cygnus, and the other vehicles that supply these critical supplies to station. So we got to make sure it goes well. The track and capture operation, the robotics operation that the crew is going to do to actually capture Dragon and put it on board space station attached to Node 2 is a very, very critical thing. It's something many crews have trained for already, and these guys will be ready when it gets there, and it'll be neat to see.
And you've done that kind of operation before in moving heavy pieces of the space station around, but is this a lot different than that?
Well, when I've done this before, I pulled a truss element out of the space shuttle's payload bay. It was fixed, it was attached. I used the space shuttle's robotic arm to actually lift it up and hand it off to the space station arm, and that did the installation task. When you're having a visiting vehicle like the HTV or like the SpaceX Dragon or the Cygnus, Orbital Sciences Cygnus vehicle, those come up and they fly formation with space station. So space station and this vehicle are very precisely flying at the orbital speeds of 17,000 miles an hour. And then at a certain point, when the vehicle is at a safe distance and behaving well, a free drift command is given by the space station crew to command that vehicle into free drift, and then they fly the robotic arm to capture it. And that is a very critical task. It's not like picking a payload out of the space shuttle's payload bay where its location, its velocity is fixed relative to the robotic arm that's capturing it. In this case, it is absolutely not fixed. So we got to make sure that it's a very well controlled, very well trained, very well coordinated and choreographed activity. And
you guys make it look easy, but it's anything but. We talked about SpaceX. ATK, of course, has announced its configuration. There are other companies involved in what basically is a new space race, commercial race. And I'm wondering about your personal plans, because you've got a couple of shuttle missions and now a long-duration space station mission under your belt. Are you anxious to be a part of this next wave?
I think it would be exciting to be a part of that. I think this is a very critical and very exciting part of our space program right now. The transition from a government-operated vehicle like the space shuttle to commercial vehicles holds a lot of promise and a lot of excitement for where we go from here. And it would be neat to have a part of that. Right now, my focus has been spending time with family, getting myself completely readapted to Earth. And if I can be involved in some way with those kinds of things, I think that would be wonderful.
Do you want to fly again?
I think all of us who do this would love to fly again, but we've got a lot of other folks that have been working really hard for a long time that deserve the next shots.
And they tell me that I get one more question here. So, you've been up for about 6 months or so. A mission to Mars or beyond would last a lot longer than that. After your experience, what do you see as the biggest challenges in terms of, the human element?
Well, one of the biggest things that the NASA science, one of the main questions we're trying to answer with the NASA-sponsored Science on Space Station is how to keep humans healthy, safe, and productive in space long enough to go to the moon long term, long enough to go to asteroids, long enough to go to Mars. And seeing what it's like to do a 2-week mission and seeing what it's like to do a 6-month mission, I think we're well on track to do that. And a Mars mission, I think, would probably be on the order of 2 years. That's a lot longer than 6 months, but 6 months is much longer than 2 weeks. So well, I think we're on track.
Seeing that you guys had no sick days during your increment, you're off to a good start there. Dan, thank you as always. Great to talk with you, and welcome back.
Peter, great to talk with you as well.
I don't believe it's that you're learned, and it's just it's a right that if you're gay, you have a right to be, you have a partner for life, and I think she should be able to make it legal.
I've always been open for gay marriage. For me, it's more about love, and if that works for somebody, then I'm happy for them and supportive of.
Houston Mayor Anise Parker has in the past expressed her doubts that President Barack Obama would ever officially endorse gay marriage. Well, not only did she tweet her happiness yesterday at the president's decision,
He's recently returned from his command of the International Space Station. During his third space flight, astronaut Dan Burbank completed 165 days in space. As a member of the Expedition 29 and 30 crews, he's performed one spacewalk and spent 189 days in space.
Astronaut Dan Burbank joining us live now to talk about his experiences in space. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Dan. What was the most exciting thing about your time at the space station?
There are a lot of exciting things, a lot of interesting things about being there. I think for me, probably the most rewarding aspect of it was just to be up there and to be part of the science that we do on Space Station right now. That's what it was built for, and to get a chance to do what we call some of the utilization, to actually put station to work and be a part of that was probably one of the most exciting.
How do you deal with, if it even comes up, boredom and cabin fever? Do you ever have to deal with that?
Space Station's pretty big, Lon. It's plenty big for the 6 people that live and work on board Space Station most of the time. So there was no problem with cabin fever at all. In fact, there'd be times sometimes when you would have a little bit of difficulty tracking down one of your crewmates, for example. So it's a big, expansive place with an awful lot going on. Boredom was never a factor at all.
I've heard that over and over again from astronauts. So what did you miss most, though, about here on Earth, back home?
Hands down, being with family. It's not just the time that you spend on board Space Station, the 6 months that you're there, that you miss the family. You get to talk to them. You get to see them once a week and talk to them most every day if you have the time. But the time leading up to the launch, the 2.5 years that you spend, much of it on the road, traveling, working in Russia and Europe and Canada and Japan, our other partners for the space station, you do spend an awful lot of time away from family. So one of the best things about coming back to planet Earth was to be with your family again.
Sure. Dan, as you know, a private company, SpaceX, preparing to do a test cargo mission to the station, and it's even looking at a possible launch complex here in Texas. What do you think about the private space effort?
I think it's great. I think the more ways we have to get to space, the better it is for all of us as Americans and as human beings. And I think it's probably the time is ripe right now where we can hand off the low Earth orbit piece, that is getting from the surface of planet Earth to low Earth orbit. We can hand that off to private companies and let them take over that, and NASA can contract that service. And then that'll leave open the ability for NASA to go from low Earth orbit to deep space. And that ultimately, I think, is our goal as a spacefaring people and as Americans.
Well, with funding the way it is from Washington and in Europe and just about everywhere these days, space doesn't seem to be a priority anymore. Do you think the real heyday of space is behind us or ahead of us?
No, I think it's ahead of us. You know, we've got some very tough economic times right now, and not just here in the United States, but all over the world. But still, the money that we invest in space is actually a very, very small part of our federal budget, for example. It's less than 1/2 of 1%. So we do not spend a lot of money, and all the money we do spend in space goes directly into the kinds of jobs that really fuel our economy. They go into the high-tech jobs. And all that money goes directly into our tax base as well. So it's not money that's spent ill. It's money that's spent very, very well. And I think we get an awful lot of return from it. And I am very hopeful on where we're going to go from this point on. And I think we are now just at the verge of being able to open space up to hundreds and even thousands of people in the coming decades. That's what we need to do.
Well, Dan, I know all of us here in the studio wish we could have been up there with you, dreamed to be in space. Thank you so much for taking a few moments this morning to talk to us, to explain what happened to you while you were in space, and we look forward to talking to you again.
It was great being with you today. Take care.
Astronaut Dan Burbank, and welcome home. Glad you're back. Let's check in now with our online editor, Cicely Mitchell, to see what's being featured on
Dan, this is Scott, the producer in Hartford. Can you hear us okay, sir?
I've got you loud and clear.
Great. Can you hear, you're talking with Kayla. She's one of our reporters. Can you hear her okay?
I haven't heard her yet.
Okay.
Hey, Daniel?
Yes, Kayla, I've got you now.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, just fine. Got you loud and clear.
All right, good morning.
Good morning. Good to be with you.
Okay, couple... No boxes, okay. I'm holding.
Very good.
All right, Daniel, we know that you've spent the past few months in command of the International Space Station. You've only been back for a few weeks now. What are some of the first things that you do when you get back, some of the things that you miss the most when you're gone for so long?
I think hands down, Kayla, the thing you miss the most is being with family. And it's not just the 6 months that you've been on board Space Station, it's the time leading up to the mission when you spent nearly 2.5 years, much of it on the road, learning all you need to learn to operate an international space station. But that was hands down the thing I missed the most.
Absolutely. Are there any foods or any TV shows that the second you get back, you're just like, I have to get caught up, I have to go out and get this immediately?
We don't have a TV, so there wasn't too many TV shows I missed, I guess. But on the food front, there's a lot of things. The space station food's great. First off, there were some things I missed, and it was nice to get a steak. We had a T-bone steak waiting for me in Prestwick, Scotland, on the flight back towards Houston, and we also had a meat lover's pizza on another stop in Bangor, Maine.
That sounds very, very understandable. Now, we know that when you're up there for a couple months on end. What are some of the ways that you fill your time when you're gone so far away for so long?
You don't have to look very hard to find ways to fill your time. Space Station's it's a magical place. It's a very busy place. We have 6 people up there. Space Station is nearly 1 million pounds worth of hardware, and it's expansive. It's huge. We did on the order of 200 scientific investigations during our 6 months up there. There's lots of other things you do beyond the science, that is keeping the hardware operating and safe and functional in the most hazardous environment that humans have tried to live in. Low Earth orbit, for example. So there's no shortage of things to do. If you ever got remotely aboard, and that really didn't happen to us, but spending a little bit of time looking out the window at this unbelievable planet from the perspective of 400 kilometers above is something you never got tired of.
Yeah, I can imagine that's a pretty unique experience. One thing I did notice, though, I saw a picture of you, and you had a guitar up in space. Yeah. Does being in the zero gravity affect your playing at all, for better or for worse?
Well, I guess there wasn't a lot of time to play guitar, but when I was able to do that, the things that are different here on planet Earth, to hold a guitar, typically you'd have a strap that went over your shoulder to suspend it. You don't need anything like that in space, so it can just float in front of you. In fact, you don't need to stand anywhere. You can just float and do slow rolls essentially down the modules as you're playing. One of the greatest places to play guitar was in the cupola. We've got basically a 360-degree window on the world. You can see a couple of thousand miles in all directions, see horizon to horizon, a whole continent beneath you. And it's also it has pretty good acoustics there. So being in the cupola, maybe after you finished your work day, 9 o'clock or so in the evening, and playing guitar up there was pretty neat.
Good to know. Now, you've mentioned having your windows out on the world. Honestly, do you ever have any moments in all your years you've been doing this that you've ever kind of gone a little bit nervous, a little bit scared, and just thought, what am I doing up here?
I haven't. I think there are times perhaps in a spacewalk where it comes home to you that you're in a very, very different place. On Space Station, we live and work in essentially a shirt sleeve environment. Now, we all know that just a few millimeters worth of space station pressurized hull separates us from the vacuum of space. But Space Station was built by tens of thousands of incredibly smart engineers and technicians and scientists all over the world, and it has an awful lot of redundancy. And it's very easy to start to feel very much like you're at home there. And we all know that it's not exactly that, and it's a very difficult place to operate, live, and work. But we have hundreds of people that watch over space station systems 24/7, 365, and control centers all over the world. And they're the ones that really do a lot of the flying and a lot of the operating of the space station systems. And it's kind of comforting.
All right, well, you're a much braver person than myself. We thank you for your time today.
Thank you. It's good to be with you today.
Good morning, Dan. This is Robert Perlman with CollectSpace.com. Welcome back to Earth.
Hey, good morning, Robert. It's good to be with you today. Thank you.
So I've heard in some of the earlier interviews today about you describing your adjustment back to Earth. I was wondering, having just come back from my own month-long trek, I realized that I had missed some of the news that happened around because I wasn't really paying attention to it. Did you experience the same thing? Was there something that happened here on Earth that you went, oh, that happened when you got back?
It's kind of hard to say specific exact events and so forth. We do get sent up from the ground, from Houston and other control centers, the news. So we're able to catch up on the daily news if we have time at the end of the day. And it's print news and actually some of the news programs as well. You felt like you were pretty much in touch and you were able to talk to your family. So there wasn't anything major that I think took place that we didn't generally know about within about 12 hours.
Okay. So going back to the beginning of your arrival on station, you had an expedited handover because of, I believe, the progress loss back then, and the ripples through the schedule. How did that handover go, and would you recommend that type of expedited schedule to a future crew?
It was kind of a whirlwind. So when we docked, when Anton, Anatoly, and I docked to space station, we had basically 4 days worth of handover. Physical handover, where the existing crew, Mike Fossum, Sergei Volkov, and Satoshi Furukawa, were able to show us the ropes and teach us how to fly space station. We typically have anywhere from 2 months to 4 months on a normal handover, so we try to overlap the crews and give them as much time as possible. The beauty of the way this thing worked out, though, is that we knew well in advance that we would have a very minimal handover and perhaps none at all. So what we did is Mike and Satoshi and Sergei sent us down videos of all the various things they would do on a daily basis. So we had the luxury over a couple of months to watch videos multiple times. And in a way, kind of in hindsight, looking back on it, it might have been the best way to do the handovers. We essentially did a virtual handover, and it wasn't the kind of thing where somebody Mike, for example, would show me how to do something one time over the course of a couple of months that we had together. It was something that I could watch as many times as I liked until I understood it. And then when I saw him face to face, we could talk about the specifics, questions I might have had. So the handover worked out actually very, very well.
Your expedition, if I'm not mistaken, was the first to reach an average of 35 hours of utilization time. And I was wondering if you can quantify or describe that in some way that people here on Earth could relate. How busy were you in terms of doing science versus doing assembly and maintenance? Well, not assembly, but maintenance activities on station.
You bet. Well, space station, we're operating on a frontier, so it's a lot like operating a science station down in Antarctica, for example. A lot of the things that you do on a daily basis is keeping the systems of space station, for example, operating safely and doing it in such a way, doing repairs to systems if they need it, in such a way that they will last a long time. If we had an issue on the space shuttle, for example, the crew on board a space shuttle, all they have to do is essentially safe a system, and we all know that within 2 weeks that space shuttle is going to be in the care of people who have dedicated their lives and are among the best in the world at taking care of that vehicle, and they'll make it like new before it flies again. Space station, it's a different animal. So a lot of the things that you do up there, if you have to do repair, have to be commensurate with how people who have spent their entire lives working on hardware would do things. Most of our activity on space station was the utilization part of it. And you mentioned 35 hours, and I would caution you a little bit because that's really not the best way to think of it. We arbitrarily it's an artifact of how we organize the space station from a budgetary standpoint here on the ground. The thing that space station was designed to do is to answer the kind of scientific questions that allow us to leave low Earth orbit. That will answer questions that are of a basic nature that allow us to develop pharmaceuticals that will help, life on Earth, for example. There are scientific investigations, for example, on board space station while we were there that numbered almost 200. And these were experiments that we did, and there were also experiments that are operated by hundreds and thousands of scientists and researchers all around the world 24/7. A lot of the science on station is done essentially remotely, and we, the crew on board station, will be the lab technicians that take care of the hardware, that participate in some of the research, but much of it is done on the ground. The work that you do on station, essentially keeping it functioning, really is a much greater amount than the number you mentioned. We also do a lot of research on station that really does not fall in the category of what I'd call scientific research, but is technological development research. So the environmental control system that we have on space station that we very much depend on now allows us to very much close the environmental control life support loop. We want to reclaim as much of the moisture, for example, the water that humans produce in just the course of living, and we want to feed that back into the environmental control loop. So we recover water from urine, we recover water from sweat, from what we exhale, and all that is purified, ultra purified, I can assure you, and in a very sophisticated system that gives us back that water and also gives us the ability to generate oxygen. So we reclaim about 2/3 of the water that otherwise would be lost. That technology actually has a lot of relevance here on planet Earth, and that technology has been used in disaster zones in third world countries, for example. But it also allows us to be much wiser about how we take care of our resources on planet Earth. And there are many other examples on space station, and those go far beyond the 35 hours that you'd mentioned.
Well, in terms of returning some of that results back to Earth, SpaceX is getting ready to launch their first Dragon capsule to the International Space Station, something that would have happened maybe on your stay had it played out differently. But if I understand correctly, they're going to be one of the first down mass opportunities, or only big down mass opportunities after the end of shuttle. And on their list of stuff, they're bringing back crew clothing and crew choice items. And so I'm wondering if that includes your items, and does that add an additional personal stake to the success of this mission?
Well, the importance of having SpaceX and their Dragon vehicle and the Cygnus vehicle that's going to be developed and flown by Orbital Science is absolutely critical to station. We need to have a logistics lifeline that brings up supplies to station, but we also depend an awful lot on having the capability of returning samples back to Earth, for example. A lot of the biological samples that are the result of NASA experiments that answer the question of how to keep humans safe and productive and healthy in space for a long period of time really require getting those samples back to planet Earth where we can study them. So the only capability beyond the small amount of volume that we can return with us on a Soyuz is now going to be afforded by the SpaceX Dragon vehicle. And down the road, we hope to have more capability, but it's actually a critical component of getting some down mass, of being able to return things from space. We do have a small amount that we're able to bring back that are things like crew clothing or journals that we might have kept on board space station, or a few mementos and things like that. But the real importance of a vehicle like SpaceX and its down mass capability is for the science and operations of station. So it's really important for all of us, and we hope very much that they're successful in this.
Well, thank you for your time today, and welcome back to Earth again.
Robert, thank you. It's good to be with you today.